Okay, so in the previous tutorial we have added dynamic crosshair. So you can see like the crosshair spread now we can manipulate it. But currently we change this crosshair spread using a manual way. So here, like if you check the character base, I just wait for 3 seconds and do that manipulation, right? But I don't think this would be the correct approach. So we have to automate this thing, right? So that the crosshair will automatically be updated at runtime. Plus, I would like to make some changes for our existing implementation. For example, like currently I added that on spread change event dispatcher at my weapon system component itself, but I don't think this would be the perfect place to make that spread change event, right? Instead, we can go to our weapon base. So there actually, since we set the crosshair and all this stuff has been initiated here, maybe at here we can create a new event to handle that specific crosshair feature for us, or else we can create sort of like a crosshair helper that can be attached like this to this specific component, so that actually it will be reusable as well, right? Later on, like maybe when we are using a vehicle or when we are using a different sort of like item, then we can if that element implements a specific crosshair, then we can manipulate by using that specific helper, right? So now what I'm going to do is actually first do a code refactor instead of directly jump into that dynamic UMG, so that actually our code will be much more organized and it will be reusable, right? So I'll create a helper component at our components helper, right? So you can see like we have multiple different helpers now. We have montage helper to play montages, we have inventory item helpers to collect any sort of like inventory items. Similarly, now let's create a crosshair helper. So I'll create a new blueprint actor component called BPC crosshair help, and I'll go to the weapon system, cut the, actually we can't cut the function from here, so I will simply copy the name from here and paste it to there to create a new event dispatch and create a new input as well called spread, which is a float value, right? And then I can get rid of this event from here, and if I compile now it gives an error because this event is not been implemented, so I'll delete it. Also I'll delete this event as well because now I'm going to move entirely to my crosshair helper. In there I'll create a new function called what, let's say update crosshair at runtime, right? So here I'll call this specific event with the spread of 200, right? And let's go to the WB crosshair widget, and if I compile it now it should also break because at the event construct now our weapon system doesn't implement this sort of event dispatch, right? That's why actually it gives this error. So it is fine. All I have to do is get rid of these two, and let's get the current slot out of this specific weapon, and then let's, yeah, we should have a sort of a helper function to get this specific crosshair helper. So let's go to the blueprint function library bfl utilities, and I have functions that has been implemented for get montage help and get inventory item help. So similarly, I'll copy one of these function and create a new function called get crosshair help. And this function basically it shouldn't have a word context, so I'll get rid of it. We should have a owner, which is the I don't know, maybe like the weapon or something, and the component should be crosshair help. Compile. Yeah, and the return value, it shouldn't be the montage help, but it should be the crosshair help object reference. Right, now we have a valid compilation. So let's use this function at wb crosshair. So I'll use get crosshair help. Okay, and then we can listen to that on spread change event, and I'll create a new event, and we can plug the same update crosshair function to there, because the function signatures are matching one by one. Right, so it will ideally update the crosshair here. And at my weapons, at my character base, now this have a compilation error because I don't have a reference at the weapon system to this specific event, right? So let's get rid of all of these stuff, right? And instead I'll go to the crosshair helper, and at its begin play, just for testing, I'll add a 3-second or maybe 5-second delay, and I'll call this update crosshair runtime function, and we'll see whether it's working or not, right? So now if I equip rifle, let's wait for 5 seconds. Yeah, it seems it doesn't working, right? Let's see why. Right, so the issue is that we have a dead reference at here. Because I think our weapon base, yeah, weapon base currently doesn't implement a crosshair helper. That's why. So I'll add a crosshair helper component to our weapon base. Now I think it should work. Yes, you can see like after 5 seconds now that spread has been applied. Awesome. So that's bit of a code refactoring that I did. So it actually doesn't add new feature yet, but this refactoring will be helpful for us later on when we are implementing multiple different features, right? So all I did was basically created a separate component called crosshair helper to handle all of those crosshair related manipulations, right? So we don't need to actually hard code anything at our character base or even any other subsystems, right? So that clear separation of concern is there, right? So the weapon system is entirely focused on handling those weapon related inventory, and the crosshair helper is a dedicated subsystem helper that will explicitly manipulate the crosshair for us, right? So it's a separate component. Okay, now I think we can add some dynamic crosshair related update features at here. Right. So at the BPC crosshair help component, at the update crosshair runtime. Now here I can check whether I'm moving or not and all those different stuff. But how can I get the owner? Right. So this crosshair helper, yeah, let's get the player characters locomotion system. And I don't need to call this entire time. Instead, I will go to the begin play and maybe I'll configure it here and call it player locomotion system, right? So each time we don't need to cast it explicitly, right? And at the update crosshair runtime function, now I can get this reference and check whether I'm moving or not. And we should cache this thing as well, because at each iteration we don't need to check whether we are moving or not. So let's create a variable called last moving. I just have to check whether the last moving and the next frame moving has a difference, right? Because if these two are not equal, then we have a movement, possible movement, so that we have to update it accordingly. So if this one is not matched or not equal, which means our state has been updated, so the last moving should be swapped or should be inverted. So last moving should be not last moving, and then you have to check whether we moving or not. So if we are moving, then we can apply the dynamic spread. Other than that, it should go to the previous state, which means the 0. Right. Now I think this would work. But if I call this at the begin play only, it will called once, so that actually this is moving is called only once, right? So it's only for the one frame, which is not quite good. Instead, actually we have to keep calling it for each frame so that it can check whether we are moving or not, something like that. Right. So we can do that. So maybe at the begin play, yeah, let's add a timeline or a timer actually, right? So the timer is essentially a tick, but compared to the event tick, we have much more controllability over the timer, right? So for example, like if we implement a timer, we can specify when it needs to be called or when it needs to be paused, something like that. So the entire control is in our hand, so that this would be like very performance effective, right? Otherwise, if I can directly use the event tick as well, but what will happen is like it's not quite good for the performance, right? Because at each frame it's simply being called, right? It's not quite good. So instead, I'll add a set timer by event, right? Or do we have any other alternatives? We have function, but I think this would be fine. and as the event I'll create the event, and instead of using like this, we can select that specific function, which is update crosshair at runtime, right? And make sure, like, in order to plug this to the create event directly like this, you should have the same function signature, which means it shouldn't implement any sort of input events or output events, right? Because if it implements those stuff, then it doesn't match with this set timer by event function signature hierarchy, so you can't plug it, right? But in our scenario, actually our update crosshair at runtime is a default function with no input parameters, so that we can simply plug it to here like this, right? Okay, and the time, I think like 0.1 would be enough, and it should be looping. And then let's promote this to a function reference called runtime crosshair timer handler, right? So that actually we can literally use this timer to pause or continue that specific time at runtime. Okay, now for each 0.1 second it's been called, and it will check for the movement and update the crosshair spread accordingly, right? So just for testing, I will add maybe yeah, maybe a print string here to check whether our movement states are updating properly. And if ideally, like if this one is updating properly, the spread should be updated accordingly as well. But yeah, let's test this thing first. Okay, now you can see I don't have any weapon, but if I try to move, you can see it's being called, right? It's called only when I'm moving, right? That's the benefit. It's not calling again and again. Actually, the timer is being called again and again, but the functions at the update runtime won't be called again and again, because it has been type guarded by the checking last movement, right? So only when we have a last movement update, it will do that trigger, right? Okay, so now let's equip a weapon and see. Okay, it's working. So you can see when I'm moving, the crosshair is being spreaded, and if I not moved, then the crosshair comes back to the default state that it was. Awesome, right? And one other optimization that I can think of, for example, like if I equip unarmed weapon or melee weapon, by default it doesn't implement any crosshair, right? So actually we don't even need to call this update runtime function again and again, right? Because it doesn't even implement a crosshair. So let's add that feature as well. So in order to control that thing, I think we can add another variable called activate. So maybe like, let's say active. Or do we have the set active? Yeah, we have. Yeah, we by default we have that controllability to set activation, right? So I don't need that variable, I believe. Instead, let's go to the weapon base, and at the begin play, I'll get this inventory item helper, right? And I'll set active based on the weapon config enable crosshair value, right? So if this one is true, then the component will be activated. Otherwise, it won't be activated at all, right? So let's check. Oh, still active. Why was that? The Crosshair helper at the class default. I will disable the start tick enabled. Yeah, and the auto active is disabled also. So let's test it again. Oh, still being called even if I make it active. Yeah, so I can't rely on that feature maybe. So I will add a new field called active, and only if this active is true, then I can move that specific I can actually do that specific check, right? Let's go to the weapon base pack. Instead of using set active, I will sorry, I think it works, but I just used the different wrong component actually, right? Yeah, so it's my mistake. So maybe let's get rid of these two and use the same implementation that we had before, and I'll use crosshair helper, set active, and let's plug the new active like this. Now let's see. Okay, now actually I can't see that it's been called. Oh no, I still can, right? Okay, then let's set active this variable instead. Go to the crosshair helper and plug this one. Now let's see. Okay, now I can't see that is being called when I'm at the melee weapon, but if I equip the rifle or whatever weapon like that, still I can't see it being called. Let me debug it and see. Right, I think I found the issue. So I just added the print debug at the weapon base where we set the activation. So let's see what happens actually. Right? So when I instantiate first, it prints the true, and if I equip the rifle again, it prints true. But if I switch in between multiple weapons, actually that begin play is not being called, right? Because that instantiation has been already happened at the weapon system and the reference is still there, right? So the event begin play is not being called as each weapon transition, right? That's the issue. So I think we shouldn't call the active at here. Instead, let's cut this thing and go to the BPI equip and set crosshair function, and before toggling this stuff, let's set a sequence maybe, and I'll use, okay, I think I missed the reference. At the begin play we doesn't have it now, so at the set crosshair I'll get this set crosshair helper, and I'll first try this set active because I'm not quite sure whether this function is working properly or not. Let's check that later on, but for now let's use our own variable, and I'll get this one. plug it to here. Right, now let's see whether it's work. Okay, now at the unarmed.v doesn't printing the true or false updates. If I equip the rifle, it still doesn't print. Why is that? So let's add a print string here. Okay, ideally it should work because it's been true. But at the Crosshair help, I see the issue. Yes, because the Crosshair help is already been called at the begin play, because this function initialization, this component initialization will call this begin play at the very first frame, right? So whenever we set this activation, actually the component is not aware of our activation, right? That's the issue. So I'll create a new function called, we can't create, maybe I'll create a new event called activate Crosshair. I'll move all of these logics to here. And then let's call activate Crosshair at the first instance also, but ideally it won't works because the activate is false. And then let's set the activation here, plug it like this. So I'll activate at the very first frame, even somehow we equip the any sort of weapon, and at the weapon base, at the set crosshair, let's use that event, activate, sorry, this one, activate crosshair. Okay, let's see. Right now you can see when I'm equipped the rifle, it works. And if I if I'm at the unarmed mode also, it still works, because actually let me debug and see. Right, so I found the issue. So I just went to the BPC crosshair helper and added the print string statement here at the active crosshair. So ideally what happens is, like, at the begin play I am activating the crosshair, so this active will be true and it will automatically start this timer, right? And once we deactivated it, actually this timer is not aware of that, right? It keep executing whatever the activated timer, right? That's the issue. So I think we should have a way to deactivate the timer as well. So I'll get rid of this print statement, and let's say somehow if we are not active, which means we are in deactivated state, then let's get this runtime crosshair timer by handler, and let's make it clear and invalidate timer by handler, right? So that this timer won't be executed, right? Okay, and I think by default we don't need to activate it. at the component begin play. Now let's see. Okay, unarmed, now I don't have it. And if I equip the rifle, okay. Okay, let me debug further. Yeah, so I added some debug text and I actually found the issue. So I think this is one of the places we can't apply such optimization because if you can see at the WB crosshair, I'm actually binding to this specific event, right? So this should be called at the begin play whenever I construct whatever this specific crosshair. So by default, actually this one should be activated whenever it's toggling, right? So I think this activation won't work then. But yeah, that's not a significant performance degradation for our task. So what I can simply do is I can plug the activation to here. By default it will be activated, and I'll get rid of this stuff, right? And then I'll go back to the weapon base and I'll remove this active crosshair functionality at here, right? Because it won't work as I thought, sort of. I don't know exactly the reason, but somehow there seems to be having a race condition of initializing these event dispatchers and all, right? But anyway, we don't need to meet those requirements. I think this would be fine, right? So I just simplified it. I know like we have gone through a lot, but I think like yeah, I think in a way it is good, right? We can see like sort of the way how we think, and sometimes the things that we thought won't work the way we design, right? So yeah, that's a good example to such a scenario. But yeah, in case if you find out a certain optimization that we can do, please suggest. But I think I don't see such a requirement right now. Yeah, so simply I will brief what I have done. So previously, like I added this active functionality and created this specific event called activate crosshair, and initially like this was unplugged, but now I just plugged it and mark it default state as active. So whenever it is active, it will run these timelines for us, and whenever it is inactive, it will simply clear and invalidate the specific timer for us, right? And at the weapon base, at the set crosshair, I added that activation to here, but unfortunately it seems like not working, so I just removed those implementations from here, right? And I kept whatever the implementations that we had before, right, which is the simply toggling crosshair. Right, now let's go and see. Okay, so at the unarmed mode it works properly, and if I equip the weapon, you can see the dynamic crosshair has been applied, right? So whenever I'm moving, the crosshair spread is been applied, and when I'm not moving, there is no crosshair spread, right? Plus I think we can get rid of that print string statements which I added here at update crosshair at runtime. We don't have any debug test is been printed, but I think this also is almost optimized. Like most of the time we are being equipped some sort of a weapon, so this crosshair widget is been applied. So only when we move to this sort of a melee state with melee weapon or unarmed weapon, then only like we don't visualize the crosshair, right? Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover in this tutorial. And in next tutorial, let's see how we can sort of smoothen out this dynamic spread, right? For example, like now you can see the dynamic spread is being just snapped from one state to another, which is fine. But in natural, like what we have to do is this should smoothly faded in and faded out at runtime, right? Instead of snapping for two different state, right? Right. So let's see how we can do those stuff in the next tutorial. See you there. Thank you.